Hi, welcome to AI Trust Talks. I'm your host, Emma Johnson, and I'm excited to have you here. Artificial intelligence is changing the way we live, work, and connect, but with great power comes great responsibility. That's why this podcast exists, to deep dive into the critical conversations about AI safety, ethics, and responsible use. Every episode will explore the real-world challenges and opportunities AI brings, from helping business owners and corporate leaders make better decisions, to empowering data scientists to create responsible solutions, to guiding parents on how AI impacts their children's safety. This podcast is for anyone who cares about building a future we can all trust. So whether you're here to learn, debate, or just stay ahead of the curve, I invite you to join me on this journey as we shape the future of AI together. This is AI Trust Talks, where we build trust and technology, one conversation at a time. Karl is the founder and CEO of iAdvisory, a strategic consultancy that partners with governments, enterprises, and startups to accelerate digital transformation across sectors like Fintech, AI, and Web3. With over 25 years of experience, he has held pivotal roles at global tech giants, including Microsoft and Cisco, where he led initiatives in strategic partnerships, Fintech, and digital ventures across regions spanning Asia-Pacific, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. As a Dubai Future Fellow, Karl collaborates with government leadership to design a future-ready economy. He also co-chairs the Capital Club Dubai's Transformational Business Leaders Committee, focusing on the digital economy, AI, and fintech initiatives. Karl's contributions extend to intellectual property with co-invented global patent in digital payments, and thought leadership, having co-authored a white paper on economics and AI in the metaverse. Karl, been in the region and working across the globe for a number of years now. I'm really excited to have you on AI Trust Talks today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Emma, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So I want to kick off today talking a bit about the vision of AI and also the digital economy, something that I know is very close to your heart. How do you envision the evolution of AI in the next decade, particularly around the context of digital economy?
It's going to play a central role. I think we're seeing it already today, and I think what we're realizing is that that's a journey, and it's in multi areas. I think what we're seeing is AI as a technology is nothing new. It's just come to the fore because of many other factors, and those factors are driven through some visions and mandates of government, but also industry readiness, tech readiness, and the adoption curves that are being ready now to take that to the next level. There's been a lot of discussion around a digital economy, the various assets that sit behind a digital economy. We're seeing the transformation of industries, and those industries are relying obviously on tech, but also on human capital to sort of move the needle forward. So when I start to peel away and say, okay, how do we accelerate and what's the opportunity behind acceleration? There's a vast amount of data that sits behind a lot of this, but there's also a vast amount of opportunity to sort of automate and drive a lot of those efficiency gains in that world. And AI is going to play a central role in that evolution. Obviously, part of that is going to be driven by the readiness of infrastructure. So we're seeing more and more that if you're not ready from an infrastructure point of view, and that's got to be obviously connectivity services, you got to look at energy distribution in a city, and you got to also look at the interoperability of a lot of those services in smart grids. A lot of that is going to be powered and driven through AI technology and various elements of that technology. So it's going to play a critical role. I think also what we've got to look at is, how do we imagine citizen services in those new cities that are going to be built, and what does that mean in terms of future jobs and future skills, but also what does that mean for various industries as they evolve? Some new industries will be created, obviously, and some may disappear. But at the same time, we got to be very much thinking about embracing ourselves in that context. Government's going to play a strategic role because you've got to set the framework, but you've also got to set the vision to try and get towards where you want to get to as an economy. Maybe old economic models are not going to be as relevant for the future economic models, which are now being created as we speak. So it's an accelerator and it's an enabler, and it's also going to be what I believe the activator for that transition towards a digital economy.
I love that. And what unique opportunities does the Middle East have in here? And I know we've seen a lot of funding coming through recently and a lot of announcements coming through. So specifically for the UAE, and when they really are starting to lead their innovation, where do you think this is all coming from and how do you think it's growing here?
There's some core factors behind it. Obviously, I mentioned earlier the world-class infrastructure, but actually what drives a lot of this is vision and mandate for transformation. And so the economies of the region are transforming, and the UAE specifically has sort of led a lot of this. I'm a big believer in following the trade routes, and I've sort of mentioned this a few times in the past or recent past. Trade agreements are built on fundamentals of an economy sort of strategy. And when you look at the UAE strategy, it's clearly around digitizing the economy, but also expanding that economy, but also attracting talent. And back behind that is world-class infrastructure. So go back to the basics. You know, this region has some unlimited supply of certain things. Number one, renewable and non-renewable energy sources.
Yeah.
So what do you need to power the AI economy? You need high-end compute, vast amounts of that. You need extreme high amounts of energy. And you need a robust connectivity grid with high bandwidth services from multiple areas. We have that in place here. If you scratch the surface, you'll see. I mean, I got 1 gig internet come into my bedroom, and that tells you. And I didn't fund that. It came through with the fact that there was a strategy and a vision to have connectivity services as a world-class service. Obviously, we've got 5G and we've got other services. But the point being is that the investment's been made in that regard. Most recently, we've seen the last couple of weeks extraordinary announcements. I mean, if we want to sort of peel away about what's going on, they're not just announcements in terms of numbers, and obviously they're huge. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. I mean, there's a unique Stargate UAE AI essential cluster or campus that's being built in Abu Dhabi. That's significant. It's going to be a 5 gigawatt AI powered data center. I mean, that number there on its own tells you what's going on. But behind the scenes, the compute resources that are there can power other economies. All right. So we can get to the point of that opportunity is really around leadership, but also fundamentally having the right infrastructure in place to drive it forward. And that's why we're seeing, I guess, big tech, small tech, any tech wanting to be a part of that equation. And what I'm seeing here is that if you are in AI, you've got to be in the region. That doesn't just mean that you've got to be here to create. You've got to be here to think about creating IP that can be exported. And I think this is the key ingredient. And so, we've got a very focused initiative around literacy. We're seeing that already. I mean, the UAE government's already announced mandatory AI curriculum, from kindergarten all the way to year 12. That tells you where the vision and mandate is towards getting future jobs and future skills aligned. But also, if I look at in terms of those strategic partnerships, those multinationals that are coming in, they're going to come in and create some unique IP across industries, and they're going to almost have that opportunity to create a new slate. And I think this is where the opportunity lies. So we're seeing that here. It means, I believe, that this region, the UAE, will be at the front end of a lot of the strategic sort of initiatives to shape that future economy. And we have obviously a future economy readiness strategy here to bring together private sector and public sector to work together to shape that. This is very important because only when you have a roadmap and a vision that can be aligned can we then realize, I guess, all of the opportunities behind what AI can bring, but also all of the other attributes of what it'll create, which we currently don't really understand because it's happening on the fly. And so I'm a big believer that over time, not just the fact that we're going to create IP, we've got ministries that are set up to support that. So it's obviously well known that the UAE has a Ministry of AI and Digital Economy that's been in place close to a decade. And so that gives you, again, a little bit of insight on what's happening here. But on the other side, we just had, over the last 12 months, appointments of chief AI officers across the government spectrum. And that's getting everybody ready, because now it means there is a very strategic alignment towards what the potential is. And I believe that potential is going to result in this region, UAE, again, at the forefront of a lot of that. I guess cross-border becoming a net export hub for the future digital economy. And that's really what this is going to be about.
Such an exciting time to be in the UAE. I mean, I know you and I have been here for quite a number of years now.
Yeah.
But just to watch it evolve from where it was sort of almost 20 years ago to where it is today versus the journey it's on and the foresight it's got when it comes to AI. Appointing a minister of AI, the first one in the world, is just such an incredible step forward, and so nice to be part of that journey and that we've both been on. So talking about kind of the global impact, how can AI be leveraged to address global challenges such as sustainability and economic inequality?
I think fundamentally there's what I call the economic equalizer opportunity here. There is a significant opportunity to look at financial inclusion in a different way, and also, the opportunities that it brings in terms of sustainable economics, because you've got to look at it both in I guess, similar lights. To me, I look at digital inclusion as being financial inclusion, but AI is an enablement tool to help equalize the opportunity, and that starts with literacy. And so, if I start to think about that curve, and how do I uplift an economy, well, if I can have a digitally included economy, and start to play a role on helping that navigate to have access and broad access to literacy across the spectrum, I think AI allows for that, because we're seeing the opportunity. You can essentially learn on the fly, and need many new topics. And so this is an area of I think, development that we're going to see accelerate. A lot of emerging economies are looking at that curve and how do they start to build the literacy angle towards it. I think on the other side is, how do we get proper economic, I guess, output? And we're going to see real economic output maybe double or triple over the next, I'd say decade through this. And that's for every economy. Those that don't invest and don't collaborate in this area are probably going to be putting, I guess, a lot of challenges, on the table for a lot of the future jobs and skills in their own economies. So that's number one. I think on the sustainability side, it's pretty clear. I mean, we're seeing in terms of monitoring of weather and various different statistics that comes out of weather systems, we can collate that in real time. We can, permeate the statistics that are coming out of, a lot of that information that's driven through also satellite technology, in real time, and we can bring that to bear to, whether it's farms or whether it's, strategy around weather events, or whether it's something as basic as traversing a city. On a hot day like today in Dubai, maybe I want to use, my map service, whether it's Google or otherwise, not to give me the fastest route to get to a place, maybe the coolest route in terms of, temperatures on the pathways and being able, and that exists, by the way, and it exists because of AI. And so as those platforms start to open up, and provide more of that data and access towards that data, sustainable cities will become important. Obviously waste management and the supply chain behind that is going to be integrated. You want to think about a smart city integrating a lot of those areas. So one is, there's going to be hyper personalization. So obviously, carrying your credentials in a city will offer value. So how you engage with merchant ecosystems, micro ecosystems, merchant ecosystems, and the larger ones, that's going to be enabled through AI more and more as we speak. But then on the other side, how do you become more efficient in how you live?
Yep.
How do corporations uphold their ESG mandates? And then how do countries and cities start to prepare, in reaction time, real-time reaction time, for all the other events that are happening in terms of weather and those impacts.
So much opportunity in this space. Can you talk about a bit about the deficit of the infrastructure and what's needed to build the future? I know we've talked a bit about the gap, so if you just want to give us some insights into what that gap really is and what we can do to address it for the future.
Yeah, I spoke on a panel late last year, which was talking about the AI infrastructure. We looked at that in terms, I guess, we think of readiness from a data center point of and having the hosting of data. And that gap there was a number of something around the $300 billion mark as the current infrastructure gap that we need to think about addressing. But when I look at that and I say, well, that's a scratch on the surface. because it depends on which economies are we talking about and which cities are currently reflective of that number. Because technically, the amount of data we're creating every day just with our mobile devices and where that's going into the cloud, right? These are centralized cloud services. And a lot of that is in a centralized part of various cities. So it's enormous, the amount that we need to invest. And obviously the announcements in the last few weeks are testimony to that. However, there is also opportunity to look at various new ways of how you spread the energy distribution as much as the storage and compute power required to power that economy, which is essentially driven through AI. And so decentralized node networks are going to become, I think, very important. Every building in a city can potentially play a role. And they can potentially be obviously not just smart and IoT enabled, but they can also connect to a grid in two different forms. One is they can provide modular DC infrastructure services, or modular data center for those that that need some acronym definitions. But on the other side, they can also feed into a grid, sustainable carbon credit driven, credits. And so they become very much a new economic model. So I think that's going to be very important, but we can mitigate the infrastructure requirements by distributing a lot of the infrastructure. And I think this will help in two ways. You can start to create hybrid models where the centralized models will still be the most important part of the equation. But then as you decentralize, you're offering new economic models. And that's driven predominantly through data and data economics as sort of a new stream focus. So there is an abundance of opportunity, but there's also a clear, I think, gap that needs to be addressed, but in coordination with some of these new services and new opportunities that are out there on the table, but just need to be brought into line. And we're seeing some of that anyway with some of the regulation that's coming to bear.
Yeah. And how much do you think like the recent announcements from the UAE and the wider region are going to contribute to closing the infrastructure gap?
I think it's very clear. I mean, the budgets are very big in terms of what's being allocated, but it's more than that. I think the ecosystem that evolves through this is going to be significant. So yes, there is, I guess, the acceleration of adoption that needs to happen. At the end of the day, you're building these in order to consume, right? You're going to consume data. You're going to, you're obviously going to consume cloud services through those entities and through these centralized hubs. But the appetite is there. The voracious appetite for high performance compute is happening. It's required, and the contracts that are being signed now with some of the large chip manufacturers and securing that long term. I mean, that's where a lot of the trade agreements are really being put in place now. It's towards AI data center technology, and so sitting behind that is all these partnership agreements that need to be secured. A lot of the stuff that we do today in terms of securing our energy supply, whether it's oil, gas, I think you got to start securing your chipset supply, right? And you got to start thinking about, those infrastructure requirements to build these hyperscale data centers in region, and then start to create, obviously, sovereign cloud data services to protect your data in country. And then you can start to wrap around your governance framework and everything else behind that to secure that data within that, governance arbitrage, if you want to put it that way.
I do think data sovereignty is going to become a really difficult issue to tackle and risk to tackle when we move into more broader AI development. It's going to be a hot issue that we need to start thinking about as well. So let's talk a bit about building trust into AI. What frameworks or principles should guide the ethical development and deployment of AI technologies?
I think transparency is very important. And I think, we have to mitigate the bias that goes into creation of a lot of these algorithms. And so to do that, you need to make sure that you've got a robust ethical framework. We're seeing some of that coming. We've seen the EU Act around AI sort of taking a little bit of a leadership role recently in that area. The General Data Protections Act that came out as well. I mean, again, data and AI go hand in hand, right? So these are very important ingredients, but that needs to permeate across borders. And so that's one area. The other area is adoption of responsible AI use. and practices within organizations. And I think this is where the rubber meets the road. Ultimately, it's a human-created algorithm that's being put in place, right? And so you got to protect and make sure that it's transparent and it's in cohesion with, I guess, a multidiscipline sort of committee structure. So I look at it that way. So if I look at, I think IBM recently did this. They've got a committee around AI ethics and adoption. Others are doing it as well. But the point is that it's got to be in coordination. And, and even last year, we were part of this AI policy closed round table session. We obviously elevated a lot of these concerns because when automation takes over, the initial bias will just permeate, right? So we need to get that right. And we need to make sure that the data is protected and is secured in a way where you have control of that data, especially if it's your data. When I say your data, it means your personal data, the SME's data, the corporation's data, and the government data. And there's various levels there. But the ownership is yours. And so you need to be able to protect that and then secure it. And so, so they're very important parts of that equation. And then rigor of governance. You got to make sure that that governance framework allows for that to be constantly monitored and shaped accordingly. And industries will play their role. I think every industry will have a certain governance framework, which needs to then be, obviously aligned towards some of these more regional, global AI policies and acts.
Yeah. And what are you seeing locally around the vision or understanding of what's needed for responsible AI? Are we getting government engaged? Are we thinking about kind of what we need to do in this space for the region?
It's interesting. We're starting to see these regulatory sandboxes that are coming up in different areas, and I'd say this is going to accelerate. We've seen the Dubai sandbox recently announced, and that was on prop tech and I think health tech and a few other, but obviously part of that will be AI. So you want to start to think about these sandboxes from a regulation point of view and also from a tech enablement and digital transformation point of view. But I think that's an area for collaboration. If I think of collaboration, that's the area where you're going to start. So if I'm an innovator, I want to disrupt a certain industry, I need to make sure I'm within those guidelines. And we've seen that in the fintech space. A lot of the fintechs came in and disrupted, wealth advisory services. They disrupted digital payments, at the merchant level, but they also cross-border payments. And so we're going to see the same, I think, here. But, I think the opportunity is to work more closely together in a lot of these sandbox environments, number one. I think also the fact is we're seeing, certainly in this region, we're seeing a proactive engagement by government to look for those inclusive private sector contributions towards this. And as I mentioned earlier, there's been closed roundtable sessions which are capturing a lot of these insights and capturing recommendations, which then get shared back up. And I think these are really important parts of that equation. I would also say every organization should be doing this anyway.
Yeah.
If I'm a bank or if I'm an enterprise in any sector, I want to be thinking about, do I have the right teams in place to continue just to keep, our fingers on the pulse? Because as we know, AI is now automating at speeds we're not keeping up. But what does that mean? We've got to protect our clientele, and regulators are there to protect the consumer. So obviously that needs to translate downwards, right? So the corporations are there to protect their consumers, and it's got to be within that same framework. And then so this, the leadership within those organizations need to be empowered and also understanding that they're operating within that framework. So, yeah.
And you're a Dubai Future Fellow. Can you tell us a bit about the role you play?
Well, that was an initiative that was created by the Dubai government to bring together private sector leaders to help in the narrative of shaping that future economy strategy. And so what's unique about it is the fact that we're a diverse group of future fellows from different backgrounds and different areas. And so what I do for my specific area, I like to bring in, digital and data economy entities that can help shape some of those narratives or some of the thinking behind what can create that future economy strategy. And so over time, I think this will become quite important because there is a future readiness strategy that the Dubai government has put in place, and I think this is quite interesting. The Future Fellowship really provides a bit of a think tank to bring that to life, and so that's really what that is. And then obviously, the Future Foundation is a nerve center for a lot of the foresight work that's going on. I think recently they released a global 50s megatrend report, which is the most recent one this year. And I chaired a panel at the Capital Club around that. And a lot of that foresight work is looking at those trends that are coming, beyond what we see today. And, how do you become future ready? And some of those insights, if I'm an organization and I'm currently not looking at some of these trends that's happening, then I'm probably closing one of my eyes towards what's going on, because I should have both eyes open.
Yeah.
And again, therein is the vision and mandate, which allows us to think beyond what's here today. And having that in place and being a part of that, I think is quite exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's a good place to be. So what role should regulation play in sort of fostering both innovation and then being responsible in AI?
It's really important, again, to be a bridge. Responsible adoption of any innovation solution has to fall within the line of the industry regulation. And so whether it's in health or whether it's in finance or others or in education, there's a clear, I guess, opportunity there to bring it together. And so regulation is there, again, to protect the consumer's rights and to protect the consumers in every aspect, of that service that's being generated in that sector. And so you want to build the bridge. One of those bridges is, yes, sandboxes could play a role. I think more also as part of that is, if I start to think of venture building as a mechanism for creation, you're creating from the ground up. I think this is where you can play quite a significant role. And I think we're seeing some of this, because venture building at the end of the day is taking either a problem to solve, and that might be coming from the regulator, or it might be coming from the industry. On the other side of the equation, there is the startup innovation world, which has solutions or ideas for solutions, don't necessarily have the capital, don't necessarily have the human capital behind it as well. They want to accelerate and solve that. Or they may have an idea that they want to bring in that solves some of this. So you want to provide that bridge. And I think this is where the combination of venture building, studios and corporate venture building is already in place, but I think that'll continue to accelerate with AI, especially on the alignment towards responsible adoption of AI. And on the other side, making sure that the regulator is part of that equation.
Yeah. So we've talked a bit about kind of the infrastructure, the foundations that are needed, the opportunities in AI, and also how do we build trust in AI. So I want to cover off now about kind of integrating AI into business and into society as well. So what are some of the key challenges and opportunities for businesses that are integrating AI into their operations?
Clearly, there needs to be a roadmap. And I think that roadmap needs to be achievable. To take the first sort of step, you've got to do an AI readiness assessment, really. You've got to start with the basics. Where are you at in terms of AI? And that covers many aspects. One is technology and systems and, all the back-end infrastructure. But on the other side is people readiness and literacy in that world at every level of an organization. And I think enterprises are already seeing this, not necessarily really knowing where and what to do. So I go back to that, if I do know where the gaps are as we understand today, and there are certain platforms out there which are coming to bear now, which conversationally allow for this to happen. But I think also there needs to be a deeper dive AI readiness assessment. And that should go all the way to the individual in terms of, I should be able to take that home and say, you know what, I'm going to train myself as a leader, as an IC, an individual contributor. And I think enterprises need that. You need that AI readiness done. On the other side, the roadmap's got to be achievable and realistic in solving current problems that you have. And they not necessarily are going to solve every problem. They may be seen as a solution at the front end, but if you didn't spend enough time quantifying the efficiency levels and the reaction to that quantified efficiency coming from your clients, we've seen some of that recently. one fintech went and, reduced a part of their sales force or part of their organization on the customer service and sales force, and the reaction was quite negative. That doesn't mean it won't be adopted. It just means that it wasn't put in place with the right mechanism. It gets really interesting when you start to think about, autonomous, AI agents that can complement what we do. And I think it's a buzzword, right? Over the last number of months, we're seeing a lot more of this, but that buzzword will translate into, I'll talk a little bit later about it, but it will translate into some real economic substance for both individuals and corporations and enterprise. But that's where we've got to start.
So you've touched on kind of the workforce. How can organizations prepare their workforce for what's coming for the future around automation, and what kind of changes do we need to make? I mean, we know that it's a big mindset shift and a cultural change that needs to happen. What other ideas or thoughts should organizations put towards this?
I'm a big believer you should allow your workforce or provide a mandate through KPIs for them to spend some quality time in the innovation ecosystem. I think what they should be doing is thinking about maybe 1 day a week. I mean, there are a lot of discussions around 4-day working weeks. Well, maybe that fifth day is you spending time in the startup ecosystem in a domain of expertise that's relevant to where you have an interest or can contribute back to your organization. Gain those skill sets with those AI entities that are building those domain expertise solutions. Get exposed to it, learn about it, because there's nothing better than learning with experience out there, and reinfuse that back in your organization. If you can do that, and if I'm a leader in my organization, allowing my or mandating my staff to do that, I think that goes a long way to accelerating the learnings, and also, I guess, the real opportunity to reinfuse that back into your organization. And what that does also, it reinvigorates the staff, because the staff become, it's like if I think about going to the gym, we get that excitement when we're there. It's a bit painful trying to motivate yourself if you're not constantly doing it. But once you are there, you're in a rhythm.
Yeah.
And then you share those experiences, right? Same concept. You start to share experiences around nutrition plans. You start to share experiences around daily habits, or whatever it is that you do. Or if just a lifestyle that you do, something that, that involves nature, you're reinfusing that back in. Take AI, and if you're infusing your staff into that environment, and then maybe spending time at these innovation hubs or at these AI campuses that are now being built. I mean, the Abu Dhabi one is going to be a science park. They're going to be developing a bunch of solutions across industry. That would be a place I'd like to spend 1 day a week. It'd be awesome, because you go there and you're really going to get infused. And I think this is where the opportunity lies. Yes, literacy, yes, onboarding, and yes, availability of various course curriculum. But the real learnings happen in that. And then it goes back to the human element, the human in the chain. Humans are at the heart of this AI acceleration that's happening. Today, it's AI. Tomorrow, it's quantum, others. But I think that is just part of the equation. But this is where you really can make it happen.
I love this. And I remember you actually gave me this advice about 12 months ago, and it's always stuck with me. And I've run a couple of innovation days myself, and just the reaction you get from people, and like reinvigorating them into the kind of thoughts and the ideas and the creativity they can bring themselves to the whole ecosystem of development and everything is also really exciting. And just watching people grow into the space, it's very cool. What educational reforms, and I know we've touched on this because we know the UAE is also looking to change the curriculum locally, what educational reforms are necessary to equip future generations with the skills needed for what's happening in the emerging technologies?
There's pros and cons in terms of the thinking of when you get exposed to the education curriculums. I think if I think about those curriculums, think of the future in the context of industry transformation. I mean, I spoke about this publicly. I mean, I've got a daughter doing a commercial law degree, and, she's halfway through that degree. And the impact on the legal industry in terms of AI is quite interesting, because already a lot of the global legal firms are adopting AI agents to do, NDA reviews, for example. That's happening. And I think when I start to think about that, if I'm in that world, am I setting the right curriculum in place for university degrees that are factoring this in? Do I need to spend maybe 4 years doing a degree that can maybe be brought a lot closer towards maybe a couple of years, which allows me to then spend quality time in the industry helping shape that new narrative?
Mm.
So I think the course curriculums in the tertiary education has to really fast track and adopt. I'm not sure people out there would be aware, but we've already got the world's first AI and robotics hospital that was launched in China. Don't underestimate that. Growing up, I mean, I remember my parents saying to me, we want you to be a doctor. But the point being is that that was for the old economy.
Mm.
Do I really want to be in that future where, we are going to have AI GPs? And what's stopping that really is the readiness of devices and tech to be able to bring the right amount of data. I wear a device specifically to feed, a lot of my sleep data and, recovery data and various other strain data that I go through in a day. Now these devices are doing things like blood pressure readings, and they're also doing things like ECG sort of analysis, so with heartbeats and regulation. So you're essentially getting a lot of this today. And so if I start to think about readiness for a medicine degree, do I need more GPs or do I need more specialized surgeons?
Mm.
And even they're going to use robotics. So I need to now shrink the requirement. Maybe I shouldn't be really reducing the number of people coming in to do those sort of degrees. Maybe I should be thinking about, how do I get them ready to be using this type of insight and technology and release them to do other things as well?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that portfolio careers are going to become the norm over time. And I think the reason for that is, like I said earlier, maybe we're starting with 4-day work weeks. It may end up going down to,
Can't wait.
and then it ends up giving you the opportunity to do this other thing.
Mm.
And so the courses need to shrink in that nature. At an early education level, one thing I always look at, and I look at my son and I look at, it's the easiest thing is to look at your kids, but their exposure to data and information. If I look at my son, he's just turned 10. In that 10 years, he's probably superseded the amount of data he's been exposed to multiple times over versus what I've experienced, certainly in that age. Whether I'd read 100 books in that age, it wouldn't relate to what he's been exposed to in terms of visual data, in terms of, gamification data. He's into obviously gaming and playing Roblox like most other kids out there. But the amount of data, and they're part of communities, right?
Mm.
So that world is quite interesting, because if we are seeing that happen at an early age, then maybe, and it was interesting because I was attending a session the last couple of days on esports and gaming. Maybe that becomes a big part of the future curriculum.
Mm.
We look at that as being a part of how do we immerse, we solve problems through games rather than, and we look at jobs. I think there was an example given that I think it was an air traffic controller job that was, yes, a person got that job because they had a gaming background, their reaction speed and that whole, deciphering data. There's a cross-functional aspect. So we need to think, what does AI and this data world offer in that world, and shape early stage learning and tertiary degrees relative to that economy, and then build that over time. Get industry involved, get the right players, and it shouldn't be product led. It shouldn't be about selling a product. It should be about getting our next generation, ample opportunity to play a strategic role in shaping that future economy.
Yeah. And I like the part around the devices people wear today and the amount of information we have access to, but it also leverages that point on literacy. even though you have access to it, do you really know how to interpret it?
Totally.
And where is the literacy, or how can we build that literacy? And in our children as well, when they start using these kind of gamification tools.
With the Whoop device that I use, it's got a personal coach in there. And it's interesting because it goes through my daily outlook. What's interesting behind that is it breaks it down based on my personal, and this is where hyper-personalization is the key. If AI is going to be realized in its entirety, it's the hyper-personalization that we're experiencing. And I get that with what I've got exposed here. And I think for me, I like to see that in action, and I do react to it because, we have a subconscious bias. Sometimes we wake up in the morning, we feel great. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're ready to go conquer the day. We generally have a feeling that we are, and we're not, based on the previous day or couple of days exposure that we had, whether we got enough sleep, whether we ate very late at night and we didn't get much sleep, or whatever it is. But even beyond that, data doesn't lie.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if we got trusted data with trusted providers, which have, fulfilled the rigor of regulation to protect me, you know what? I'm absolute. Let's go and get the best hyper-personalized approach to help me shape my life towards having a more balanced, sort of healthy approach to what I do in my life. And that filters down to everything you do.
Yeah, I'm like, I would give consent for my data to be used, provided I know where, how, and what benefit it is to me, not a negative impact. So let's talk a bit about kind of the future, AI and Web3, very hot topic. How do you see AI intersecting with emerging technologies like blockchain, the metaverse?
It's been growing and growing over time. I mean, we've seen, I guess, the explosion of tokenized real world assets as being a big asset class now. And basically what we're seeing here is digitization of physical real world assets. That's what's really happening. You layer on top of that, the flavor of the hour a couple of years ago was the word metaverse, but today you can just rephrase that and call it immersive economy or immersive experiences. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's powered by AI. It's powered by high fidelity virtual and augmented reality experiences. This is happening. And so AI helps us augment, I guess, our reality in certain ways. And so if I think of the digital asset world, going back to the young generation, they're already trading skins as their assets. They probably will end up doing that automatically because they'll just set parameters for their own personal AI agent that will end up doing this for them in a game and maybe in real life. Right? So the blur is already happening there. Digital assets, their tokens, essentially, and then you bring that world in. But then I break it to the enterprise world and I think of real world economics, and I say, okay, if my data is on chain, and we'll take one example in terms of storage, and that data sits in a decentralized format, and I can tokenize that data and I own it, then that's an asset. So if that's the case, we've now merged the digital asset world with the data world. The next thing is just automation and, acceleration. And I think AI is going to help accelerate some of this. On the other side of the equation is, who represents me in the online world? Do I have multiple replicas of my personas replicated through decentralized agents? AI agents that are spread in multiple domains, and then they earn digital assets for me or create a digital income. And I think that's where the interesting mergers are starting to happen. We're starting to see the first, I think, version of this where our AI agents are being put to use. I think the next version is, okay, how do they actually earn me an income?
Yeah.
And then how do I extrapolate that value and share that value in the way that I want to share it? So that world is happening at speed and scale. I think we're going to see a lot more collaboration happening here. We're seeing it more so in the world of regulation wanting to come on board, but we're going to see much more in that space. We can already buy a fraction of a building really through fractional tokenized REITs. So that's happening already in the UAE's. I think Dubai has already announced that last week. And now you've got a prop tech hub that was announced for some of that. So you're merging token economics with physical real world asset players. The next one is, okay, smart grids and smart cities, and how do I automate and bring AI to play a strategic role?
Yeah. And we've heard a lot about data monetization. What do you think the implications of AI will be on data monetization, and how can individuals retain control over their data?
It's the biggest, I guess, challenge, but opportunity. So the challenge is who owns that data? We should, ultimately. And it has to be linked to an ID credential at the end of the day. And that credential has to be a link back to essentially a human or a corporation, and I think, or an entity. And once you've got that, then the ownership should be very clear. I think where it gets a bit blurry is when agents start to create IP. And it's interesting, I was part of a legal half-day workshop recently, and that was a big talking point.
Mm.
If the agent is working, does it own the IP, and so therefore it needs to be rewarded? That's interesting.
Yeah.
But data monetization is going to accelerate, right? Because the opportunity for that data to be monetized is going to grow once we start to realize it has a value. I think we have to really understand if it's an asset for us individually, we must control that asset. That's the basic norm.
Yeah.
And then from there, if I make it available, then I should be rewarded in the way that I choose to be rewarded. And I think that's where we spoke about the health side. Well, there is a benefit from a health perspective, but there's also other benefits that can come in. I mean, there could be value towards reduced insurance premiums, for example.
Mhm.
If I'm daily active and I'm daily doing what I need to do, why aren't I getting the benefits through that? At the same time, if for some reason my biological age is less than what it actually is because of my health lifestyle approach, shouldn't I be treated that way?
Yeah.
Shouldn't my premium be reflective of that versus what it says on my birth certificate?
Yeah.
So there's an angle behind this, right? Because it brings that into balance. I could be arguably 60 or 70 years old, but you know what? Based on my health statistics that I'm doing and everything that I'm doing, I actually about 50. So my premium should be related to this age maybe. And so there's another angle to look at. But yeah, I think you gotta first own it, and then you'd be able to then make it available to where you want and monetize accordingly.
And we've talked a lot about ecosystems. I mean, what strategies can foster innovation ecosystems that support the development and scaling of AI technologies?
Key word is really collaboration, but also we spoke a little bit earlier about this. Sandboxes are good environments to bring ecosystems together, but nothing beats the fact that you got your human capital out there and engaging in that ecosystem. And what I say by ecosystem, a lot of people sort of trust big tech because big tech creates, but big tech acquires small tech. If you look at a lot of the big announcements recently in terms of acquisitions, it's big tech acquiring a lot of the brands that we currently use, whether it's in the social world or whether it's in the device world. I think what we don't realize is a lot of these big companies are made up of dozens of other companies, which were initially just startups. And in the AI world, that's been happening. You've seen it, with investments that have been happening into DeepMind and acquisitions of DeepMind, from Google and Microsoft into OpenAI. I mean, there's essentially investments and acquisitions going on there, but they were startups. Every company out there was essentially a startup before they became what they became. So if I'm allowing that ecosystem to thrive, the way it's going to thrive is when you got the experience in the market playing a role with that ecosystem, and that's experienced, but also the young working together. And so I'm big on that world. How do you help that world work together to come to life? The private sector and public sector and PPP models are the key to that. I've spent most of the last 25 years doing this because I'm a big believer is if you can get that right, it accelerates the opportunity in an industry ecosystem. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do that, and I'm still doing it today because there are leaders in a lot of these institutions who see that as well, but don't necessarily know the pathway to get there. And so shouldn't all fall on the regulator, because regulators should just have a mechanism of the rules. But those rules will eventually change over time relative to what's being created. So that's the key for me is you gotta really get immersed in the environment. Leadership, in academia needs to play a strong role there. And the regulator really plays almost like a sideline official that takes the feedback and then reinvigorates and continues.
And I want to close off today with kind of a bit about you. Reflecting on the career you've had, which is covering a lot of different areas and industries, what was the pivotal moment that kind of got you into AI and interested in the digital space?
Well, many pivotal moments. If I start with more recently, I can go all the way back, but I'm actually a telecoms engineer by background. What linkage does that have with the current economy? Well, funny enough, it's the heart of the economy because connectivity services are the key.
Mm.
But, spending my early part of my career as an engineer, I had early access also to being an entrepreneur. Although I was an engineer and I was working full time in that space, I did have a software company that I'd set up with a number of colleagues. And, that sort of set me on a stage of entrepreneurism with the world of tech and innovation. I always knew at some point I would be playing a role in both worlds. So gravitate towards more recently the world of AI and the digital economy space. There was a couple of pivotal moments in that sort of acceleration. And, I spent time with Visa, driving their digital partnerships, Fintech and ventures group strategy I set up in this region. But what was interesting in that time is that I got exposed to a lot of these new early stage startups which are innovating in the fintech world, and then the concept around how do you bring that to life, right? After I started to do that, I was pretty much being approached to be on advisory boards for a number of companies to try and accelerate these transitions. And then there was a pivotal moment around just after COVID, pivotal word COVID, but it was in 2021. I was at the Capital Club doing a dialogue, a fireside chat on AI and its impact on society. That was at a time when the word AI wasn't really spoken much of. And I was on stage with Representative Singularity Dow, and they were talking about how they were infusing Sophia, this humanoid robot, with algorithms. And it dawned on me in that discussion, we had, dozens of our members at the Capital Club, watching this discussion. And in that moment, I just thought, why are we focusing on algorithms infusing physical machines when we should be thinking about algorithms that represent us in the digital world? And that digital world today, well, at that point, was this world called the metaverse. And I thought that's where the concept of AI merging with the digital economy can happen. The very next day or a couple of days later, I got a phone call from the Mohammed Rashid School of Government, a good friend of mine, John Lillywhite, and he said, let's get together and explore a little bit further. So we ended up exploring a little bit further. Cut a long story short, we ended up writing a white paper on it, and that was the Economics and AI in the Metaverse white paper, which we announced back in September of 2021. Again, those two words were not very common. And then it was only, I think, maybe 6 or 8 weeks later, I think Facebook became Meta.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine what happened after that. So that really set the trajectory towards a digital economy and AI. But the most important part of that equation wasn't just the digital experiences. It was the fact that AI was going to play a fundamental role in that world.
Yeah.
And that was a pivotal, I think, shift and acceleration.
I love it. Thank you. Well, Karl, thank you so much for joining us here today and sharing your insights. I'm sure the audience have absolutely loved what you've had to say. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of AI Trust Talks. I hope this conversation has sparked new insights and empowered you to think critically about the role of AI in our lives. Together, we have the power to shape the future where technology serves humanity responsibly and ethically. If you have found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe, share, and join the conversation. Your voice matters in building a trusted AI future. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and let's keep building trust in technology, one conversation at a time.